Hello everyone, our dear listeners. The topic of the webinar is test automation frameworks, build or buy. Today we'll have two speakers who will be discussing this question, the issues which may appear, and I'm sure it will be very interesting. Our first speaker will be a program manager at QATestLab, our head of technical and test automation testing program, Ivan Akirik, who has a good experience in this field and will explain generally what are pros and cons of buying or developing by yourself framework. And the second speaker will be Duncan Brigginshaw, the technical director of Odin Technologies, the good partners of QATestLab, the guys who are doing amazing tools which help to automate your projects and to simplify the works in it. Now we can start. As I mentioned before, Ivana will tell us about general information about is it good or bad to buy or develop this automation framework. Ivana, please go ahead.
Hello, dear audience. I'm glad to be here. I am Ivana Akirik. I am a program manager. So let's start. And first topic, we talk about build or buy automation framework or tool. Yeah. In case of test automation required, should you build your own automation framework or buy a ready one? First of all, I must say that both ways are acceptable. The choice depends on your project and of your needs. Today, I am going to tell you how to make that fair decision. Every automation framework is a tool that helps you to prepare, execute, and analyze automated scripts. First of all, it's reduced time needed for test preparation and maintenance. Secondly, framework helps to make your code more readable and reusable. Also, framework can save you a huge amount of money as you don't need a large number of testers. Sure, there are more reasons, but I think these 3 points are the most important ones. First question, how to choose a ready solution. As nowadays, you can face a variety of ready solutions for test automation. You can buy a ready framework or tool, or even simple way, use open source solution. But it's not so easy to select a framework that will suit all your expectations and needs. To select a proper framework, you should define all the criteria you require. Just make a list of them. Will you automate desktop and mobile testing? What language is your project written in? Do you need cross-browser or cross-platform testing? The more requirements you write, the better. Don't be afraid to spend some time to enumerating them. Believe me, your effort will be fully justified. Also, while thinking of a framework, you should consider the following key things. First of all, it's your main purpose. What task are you expecting to solve using a framework? Next main thing is your opportunities. What budget is available? Of course, budget is very important thing. Next point, it's your perspectives. Is it long-term or short? How are you going to develop it further? And at the end, it's expected profit. Will you use the same framework for different projects or only for one project? In the majority of cases, you'll find a ready solution that meets your requirements. It will be either open source or commercial. Next question is build or buy. To be honest with you, almost every junior test engineer dreams about developing own perfect solutions that will be flexible and safe. But with course of time, these big dreams are disappeared. Why? Mm, why was the last time you saw ready automation framework with totally new idea, or automation tools that has truly new functions? It is not common. On the one hand, everything has already been invented, and there is no point to reinvent a bicycle. But on the other hand, why should you pay big money for features you don't actually need? Some IT specialists are sure that the variety of ready solutions for test automation reduce the competence of automation testers and simpler their tasks. As a result, less skills and knowledge are required. So development of automation tools decrease specialist qualification. Maybe it makes sense. I think listeners will agree that easy way is to use a ready framework or solution. Using ready framework, you are 100% sure that its code ready works. You can be sure the tool was developed by professionals. The majority of companies care about their reputation and won't create poor and useless things. Besides, ready solution has typical tasks already solved. You get a tool ready to use without any additional development tasks required. Other people have to do everything to instead of you. Have they done it well? It's quite different question. One more great plus is that almost every ready automation solution is well documented. Besides, some companies that develop software of test automation conduct certifications for using their tools, and it's great, I think. Nevertheless, everything is not so good as it may seem. Let's look at Ready framework under another perspective and drawbacks of Ready solutions. What is framework? In a short, it's a code written by unknown people whose experience and skills you are unaware of. The ready solution can be supported with documentation of something well, but sometimes it's poor quality. It can be very complicated by understand the principles of its work. Then you have to spend time and resources to rewrite code and fix issues. I can single out main pitfalls you can face buying ready solution. And first, it's you cannot know for sure whether ready test automation software will work with your other project and your new features. In order to experience all the benefits of ready framework, you should know how to use it. Some tools don't have clear documentation, so you have to explore it yourself. You should be ready that commercial solutions usually satisfy only basic needs. And don't forget that every framework has functional limitations. It's why we must build own solution. Now we reviewed another options. The biggest plus of development of your own automation framework is full control over it independently. Building own automation framework, you will be always sure that your solution satisfies your specific and uncommon needs. But developing own automation tool, you should consider several key aspects. And first aspect is your solution should ensure fast creation of automation scripts. Next topic is it should have convenient to clear logging and reporting functional. Next important thing, its framework should be flexible and easy maintainable. And at the end, your solution should be easy to use and require less learning. In such a case, you will get a profit of your own framework. The main disadvantages of building your own framework, there are time, money, and resources. Development of your own framework is not one-day activity. It requires much planning, analysis, and development itself. Besides that, some commercial frameworks have a free trial period. If building own solution for test automation, you should have specialists who have enough skills and experience. Also, you should provide them with all necessary requirements to develop framework. It requires investments. Open source and commercial solutions has separate formal support. And I want to summarize. What we have at the end. Two options are available. Build own automation solution if you have very specific and complex project, enough budget, and you have skilled specialists. Or you can use ready automation tool, commercial or open source one. If your project is not specific, if you have a limited budget, tight timelines and time frames, and you have a QA team of non-technical specialists. Maybe that's all information from me. Thank you for your attention. And Stan?
Yes, thank you, Ivanka. Very interesting information. I am sure it's also interesting for our attendees. Please, dear attendees, please feel free to write questions which may appear during Ivana's speech or during Duncan's presentation. We'll be glad to answer all the questions at the end of the session. So our next speaker is Duncan Brigginshaw, who is Technical Director of Odin Technology. Actually, Duncan will provide us with the information about their solutions, their framework, and how it can simplify the work on projects, how it can help building automation projects. Duncan, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Duncan Brigginshaw, the Technical Director for Odin Technology. We've been a vendor in the test automation space for over 15 years now, building and implementing frameworks for a number of clients across the globe. And I'm here to really cover some of the similar points to Ivana there, and have a look at that question that we're being asked today about building or buying an automation framework. So for the agenda for today's section of the webinar, I'll be looking at a bit of history and how test automation tools have evolved. Based on that history, how the framework requirements have changed. So how frameworks compare to traditional test automation tools from big vendors like HP and Microsoft to frameworks that exist around open source solutions like Selenium. We're then going to have a look at the topic of aligning automation and development practices within an organization and the desirability to do so. And then just to reiterate on similar points to those in Ivana's presentation, the pros and cons of building or buying your own framework. And then we'll take a look at a commercial framework offering from Odin Technology, Scriptworks. So let's get back into a bit of history and look at the evolution of test automation tools and how things have changed over time. With traditional automation tools, they've evolved, and by traditional automation tools, I mean those that cover thick client applications, a broad scale of applications under test. So the typical tools that you see from big vendors like HP, IBM, Microsoft, and Oracle. And those tools have been, as I say, in development for over 30 years. And they've evolved features that make the process of automation easier to access for non-technical testers and those with less technical experience in automation. So within those tools, we see sophisticated development environments, sometimes based on capture replay, which isn't always the most desirable approach to automation, but oftentimes they involve that kind of level. We also see sophisticated mechanisms for handling test data rolled into those IDEs so that you can handle and manage your test data within the same environment. Sophisticated ways of managing the actual application under test objects, the fields, buttons, etc., which make up your application. So ways of storing information on those objects that can be used and managed by multiple resources in a team. They have solid runtime environments, so those that have developed to enable you to test multiple different application types, from thick client Oracle, SAP, Windows applications to mobile and web. And those vary depending on the different tools. They have scripting languages. Now those scripting languages have evolved from base languages like VBScript and VBA to incorporate new features specifically around the use in automation. And they also have good, solid ways of handling results and porting those results to different environments and different platforms. So this is one of the a sort of typical makeup of a historical automation tool. And that's enabled us to test in broad application bases. So what's changed? Well, there have been a series of environmental changes in those last 30 years, which have led those tools to die out in favor of more modern open source solutions. Those are really the rise of internet and software as a service platforms being developed specifically for browser access and internet-based applications. The shift to continuous delivery regimes, the use of build orchestration tools like Jenkins, etc., mean that those tools tend to exist on platforms that are not thick client friendly platforms, things as Linux, Macintosh, etc. So the execution of tests now has come away from Windows platforms. And also cross-device and application consumption. So users are accessing applications on varying desktops, Mac desktops, Windows, as well as tablets, mobile devices, etc. So all of this has led really to a change and a falling out of favor of the traditional thick client automation tools, and seeing Selenium being the rising star really in the automation world. So how has this affected framework requirements? Well, from a Selenium perspective, what you get out of the box is really a set of libraries, really, language bindings, they're known as in Selenium terms. So we can use Python, C#, major mainstream development environments to build our automated tests. And we also get runtime drivers that enable us to run our tests against different browsers. But that's it. That's all we get in terms of Selenium. So how have framework requirements changed then over time? Well, let's look again at really what is the notion of a framework. As Ivana mentioned, it's a structured approach to automation consisting of tools, libraries, functions, all those kind of elements that make up an approach to test automation in an organization, typically aimed to simplify automation. And oftentimes, most frameworks will add additional abstraction layers to simplify the use of those frameworks for subject matter experts. The rich pool of domain experts within an organization that understand the business and the test scenarios that are required, but might not have a leaning towards programming in more complex application programming languages. So this is a typical traditional tool, something that consists of all these different components. And really, frameworks have evolved to add that abstraction layer to involve non-technical subject matter experts in addition to what those tools supply out of the box. You've heard of terms, probably if you've been in the industry for some time, of data-driven frameworks, which allow non-technical users to to specify test data that's then consumed by code written by the more technical staff. You may have come across terms as keyword or modular frameworks, which enable the composition of components, the creation of keywords, action words, etc., that enable us to build up test scenarios without the requirement to code, but there is still code in the background required to implement those keywords. There are also a number of model abstraction frameworks that exist both in the commercial space, and you can see there the logo of our Axe automation tool, which is a tool-independent platform for automation that enables non-technical users to build up tests in a spreadsheet-like format, and then it generates code. And there are other alternative model abstraction frameworks as well. And the idea behind those is that they involve the non-technical users in defining every step of an automated test scenario, and therefore switching the balance to non-technical testers from the more technical. So with Selenium, well, we need to add all these other components, these rich components that are required for automation. So we need to pick and choose an IDE. We need to pick data source handling mechanisms, ways of presenting data, and also how to handle our objects. Do we use page object models or do we use some other mechanism? And that's before we even get into looking at model abstraction and allowing non-technical users to get involved. So really what frameworks have become in the use alongside Selenium is that they've become test automation recipes consisting of components from multiple open source projects, potentially commercial vendors, and they get a lot more complex. So you may pick an IDE like Eclipse or Maven to manage the creation of test scripts. You may pick TestNG as your execution component, Extent for reporting, Apache POI to handle your data sources, Java JDBC and Postman to handle non-UI components like SOA testing and the like. Really what I'm trying to illustrate here with this slide is that these recipes are more complex, and that automation is not just a single framework, it's a series of components when you're working alongside Selenium, and in this case Java. And therefore this increases the learning curve that Ivana was talking about in her presentation, that more technical requirements are put on test automation staff to understand how all these components will work together. So if we have a look at some of the questions near the end when we get onto the demonstration, we'll show you the ins and outs of the ScriptWorks product. So it's desirable with all these things in the mix to align skills and processes in a team. If we are developing in Java, then it makes a lot of sense for us to automate our tests in Java as well, so that we can share those sorts of skills. So let's have a look at the requirements for aligning automation and development. It's highly desirable to do so, to essentially have common processes within a team, use the same build orchestration tools, the same IDEs, the same practices, and more importantly, to have common skill requirements throughout the team. So your Java developers can backfill and help your Java automation experts, and everyone can pull together to create the automation solution. And it's often overlooked when selecting an automation tool that sometimes automation teams will set up essentially a siloed activity using their own tool sets, their own practices, their own build orchestration mechanisms, etc. And often that's not desirable. Streamlined delivery, again, building an application, deploying to live, especially in continuous delivery regimes, means that test automation becomes part of that delivery process and must be built and run at the same time. So let's have a look at application development and where it is today, and how that has impacted on the requirements for test automation tools and frameworks. Really, JavaScript is dominant, particularly in application development of web and mobile apps, with statistics from Stack Overflow, GitHub showing that it's the #1 language now in use in development, and also 4 out of the 5 top development frameworks use JavaScript. Mobile apps on the rise as well. So we're seeing JavaScript becoming dominant in the environment as a development language. And really this is borne out when we look at Selenium JavaScript. So Selenium JavaScript in the last 7 days, these stats were produced only a few weeks ago, show that nearly 1 million downloads of the official Selenium JavaScript drivers have been pulled down. And you can see even there a little blip in the holiday period, the Christmas period, where people took some downtime and stopped downloading. Also add on top of that, Protractor, a JavaScript wrapper with 500,000 downloads in the same period, and WebDriver IO over nearly 150,000. So 1.5 million downloads a week of these products. So what are some of the pitfalls and problems with working with JavaScript and Selenium WebDriver? Well, typically test scripts are sequential in nature. So you want one activity to follow another activity in sequence. Unfortunately, JavaScript is an asynchronous language. And what this means is that you can't guarantee that step 9 and step 10 in your tests are going to be executed in that sequence. So a validation may be done before the calculation takes place. And this leads to problems and confusion when using Selenium JavaScript. There are solutions to this, but as we can see from the code that we've got here, callbacks, promise chaining, etc., the code to automate becomes much more complex, and therefore our learning curve has increased. So the gap between a typical QA engineer and the use of a traditional commercial tool with its IDE, a JavaScript framework, a Java framework built up from all those kind of recipe components, and a typical asynchronous JavaScript solution has widened over time. And this really accentuates the necessity to look at frameworks more closely and to help lessen that gap and the skills gap, really, about what we're talking about here. So going back to the questions, and I think Ivan has done an excellent job in the former presentation of summing up the issues associated with build versus buy. So I'll add a few extra things of my own views as well. Primarily control and design in the build camp. So you will know what you're building, it can meet your requirements specifically, and you have that level of control. Flexibility to change also. If your environment changes, your desktop environment, your application moves to a new development regime, then you can change your framework accordingly. Oftentimes, it might be that there's just no suitable solution available that covers all of your needs. So building a solution is all that you have. Sometimes this could just be an awareness issue. Is there awareness of solutions that are out there that might fit your needs? One of the biggest problems, and again, coming back to JavaScript specifically here, is that there's often limited technical resource pools available within an organization. And JavaScript as well, out at Selenium JavaScript specifically in the community, is one of those skills that's on the rise. There is not a huge pool of resource, and salaries are now starting to match the limits in those resources, matching supply and demand. Or could you train your own internal staff to do so, but then there's time requirements for that. Another good point that Ivana raised here was the time required to be productive. Building your own solution means you are not automating tests on day one, you're building your framework on day one. Ongoing maintenance, the provision of support, training and documentation in all of this. So often support, training and documentation are left as low priority tasks in designing and developing a framework. And one key point and one risk, and I think James asked a question that what are the risks in building your own? And this is one of the biggest I see in my experience, is that staff leave, they go on to command or into other organizations with bigger salary offers, and once they've left, the rest of the team don't have the skills or the knowledge that that person has in having built and designed their own solution. Another one really is lack of testing. We come to look at who's actually testing the framework code. And I have countless examples of clients where we've seen frameworks which haven't been tested. They've led to false positives and bugs have been missed and gone into production. So who tests the framework code? And we get into that vicious cycle. Do we automate that testing? Cost, of course, all of those things weigh up together: hiring, training, the time required to develop, building documentation, etc., all cost money. So in the buy camp, well, if we've got a suitable abstraction type framework which enables non-technical subject matter experts to get involved, then we can often use in-house resource with minimal training. Productive instantly, you install the product or you access the product online, and you can start automating from day one. You know it will be maintained, supported and tested. Organizations and software vendors, as Ivana mentioned, have their reputations at stake, so they need to provide well-maintained and supported products that are thoroughly tested with basic QA processes. From a point of view of the cons to purchasing a framework, this potential feeling of loss of flexibility. So is my framework flexible enough to cater for all my needs? Can it be extended by myself in-house or my team in-house to cover those? Does it have integration points? Often working with a vendor closely, having a good relationship with that vendor means that you can help feed into their development pipeline with your own requirements. And we as a vendor like to nurture that kind of relationship. Obviously, vendor lock-in is a big one. The feeling that you're tied to a specific vendor and making sure that we can decouple our code from a specific vendor if we choose to. And cost. Cost appears in both columns here as cons really to developing your own framework. So the cost of developing your own is often hidden in staff costs, training costs, etc. Whereas an upfront bill from a vendor is more stark in reality in highlighting the cost of a solution. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce ScriptWorks, a commercial JavaScript Selenium framework from Odin technology. As I mentioned before, we have a test automation platform called Axe, which covers other tool languages and traditional tools from all the different vendors as well. This is a new product that we've been working on over the last year, specifically aimed at that JavaScript environment and the problems that the skills requirement faces. It's a software as a service platform. It enables subject matter experts to deliver automated tests into continuous delivery cycles. It's instantly productive. You can sign up, easy to learn. It's based on a training type platform that's used to teach people how to code. And therefore, as well as being a fully featured JavaScript Selenium framework, it also promotes technical QA development. So enables people to look at how, as they're building their scripts using the abstract layer, that they can see how the code is created that corresponds to what they're doing. And they can learn. And if they feel that they can start to build their own JavaScript codes and frameworks, then this is a stepping stone towards that. More importantly, it unifies the code base. By teams operating in JavaScript, they have common skills and common tools that are associated with building and running those particular tests. It incorporates a modular visual test development environment. Some of you may recognize the foundation of this particular approach to designing tests. It's a block-based approach to designing test automation. It enables you to use programming constructs in a way that's easy and accessible to non-technical staff. And it's used in training students and graduates across the world in how to use code. So it's a suitable structure for this. We see instantaneous JavaScript code generation. So based on the test design, an instant view of what code is coming out of the framework is shown. And it handles complex coding type scenarios with decisions, loops, etc. It comes with pre-built recipe components that you'd expect in an automation recipe, like managing and handling objects and on-screen elements, results, data source handling, and other features. And also incorporates integrations with other vendors, such as Applitools, who have a solution for visual testing. In this case, we can add Applitools eyes checks to a standard test just by dragging in some blocks there. So for the demo, we've got an application under test, which is this simple sample app that you can find online that's used for testing automation tools and making sure that they work correctly. In this case, we enter a value into the weight field, hit calculate, and it tells us how much we would weigh on a particular planet. So let's have a look at using ScriptWorks to automate a script in that. And there's only a few minutes of demonstration here, and we can see how that works. So how to identify objects. ScriptWorks comes with a inbuilt mini browser, if you like, that's hosted within the application. So you can sign into a web page, you can point and click at an element, provide a name to that element, and you see that the relevant selector is created automatically and it's added to our element list. We can also highlight elements based on the selector that we've created and continue to add further elements. So we'll add the calculate button, providing that with a name. And last but not least, we'll add the result that we want to check as part of our test. So the final step in here is accessing the result, and once we've done this, we should have 3 elements added that we can use to build up our actual test process. So let's look at how we use those elements to build a test, and this is where ScriptWorks really comes into its own. Tests are built using building blocks. So we have building blocks for common actions that are performed in the Selenium environment. In this case, we drag in a block that shows us or provides the wrapper to our test. We then choose a browser action. In this case, we're going to navigate to the URL. In this case, I'll cut and paste that in. So we add in our browser navigation block. And then we can switch over to the elements, and we can see the fields that we have in our application and the actions we can perform against those fields. So in this case, we want to type a value into the weight field, in this case, 200 pounds. We then click on the calculate button. So we're dragging the action for clicking on calculate. And last but not least, we want to check the output. So what we do is we'll add an assertion. So we have these assertion blocks available, and we can use the output value. So we can get the value from our output and drag that in as our our actual value, and we can do a comparison with a text value in that case. So we're adding in a very simple test case there, showing navigating to a browser, entering some information in a field, clicking and checking the value that's returned. So let's look at what ScriptWorks is doing in the background here. Whilst we were adding in our blocks in this particular case, in the background, JavaScript code was being created to automate that test. And you can see when we click on a block that it associates it with the code statement that's been written in JavaScript for that particular action in this case. And as we type or change our test on the left-hand side, you'll see that the code is instantly updated on the right-hand side. So code generation is instantaneous and traceable back to the abstract environment that we were looking at. Finally, test execution and results. So we'll switch to a desktop view. We'll look at the test that we created, and we'll pick a target browser to execute against. In this case, we'll pick Firefox. And as you've all seen automation scripts run, but let's focus on looking at the results. So it's a very, very quick application run. You'll see that it's launched a browser, this time locally on my desktop, but this can be anywhere, on infrastructure like Source Labs, etc. And you can see that we've seen a fail appear in our results. And the reason for that fail is that our expected value there of 1200 didn't match our actual. We get a screenshot captured. We can capture this at every step in our script as well. And in this case, we can correct our test and rerun that particular test again to see a pass in that particular instance. So we can rerun that test with the new information, and we should see a pass test. So finally, I just thought I'd show some of the flexibility of the JavaScript language, specifically that Scriptworks builds its scripts in. Because JavaScript is asynchronous in nature, it means we can run an individual test on multiple devices, multiple platforms, completely in parallel at the same time. So if we take a look at this same test that we've just created, we're going to run it on both an iPhone simulator, an Android simulator, and 3 separate browsers all concurrently. You'll notice that when we fire up the test, the browsers will launch first as the emulators take a little bit of time to spool up. So we'll select Chrome, an iPhone 6, Firefox, and a Google Pixel simulator. And when we hit play here, we should see a wealth of activity as all of our browsers pop up, run the test, and finally our 2 mobile platforms run as well. And you'll see over in the results there that all of those tests have passed, and we get a view of all 5 tests run against those different platforms. So really, I'd just like to thank you for your attention today, and your time in listening to some of the arguments around build versus buy frameworks, and also for taking a look at Scriptworks, our tool, which I'm really excited about. It's something that we've been working on for some time now, and we think has a very neat solution to a problem in the build versus buy framework camp. So I've seen here a number of different questions. Do you want me to go through those at this stage, Dan? Or?
Yeah, I believe I can read it for you and Ivana, and
Sure.
You can answer. So yeah, the first one. First of all, yeah, let me say thank you for this very detailed presentation. Sure. It's really impressive and very good. So yeah, we have some questions. First one from James. What tools do you use on your projects, and what tools are better not to use? I believe both Ivanka and Duncan can have an opinion to this question.
Sure, yeah, I think Ivana might be well placed to answer that as an automation, as a project manager in the space. Clearly, my view is that you use whatever's appropriate for your target application and environment. And depending on the flexibility and nature of the framework, we see in our client base that use our Axe product, the tool aimed at kind of traditional tool models, if you like, that people will use a variety of things. UFT from Hewlett-Packard being probably and still very dominant in the space, but often used alongside Selenium, so that a project will use 2 different tools. And something that our framework, the Axe product, does very well is provide a layer that works with both of those tool sets. So that's one example, but I'm sure Ivana will have some other views on that.
Yeah, regarding our projects, we have a large number, and we use different tools, but I don't want to advertise them. I just want to say that the tools what we use on our project, it does not mean that they will suit for your project and for your needs, because each project has different requirements and expectations. Regarding the tools, what I don't like use, it's the better not use the tools that have poor documentation and poor support. With them, it will be difficult to work and adapt your project for these tools. Also, I'd like tools who provide a certification for using their tools, and it's cool, like Odin. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Savannah. Thanks, Duncan. We have another question from Joanna asking what programming language do I need to know in order to use your tool? I believe it relates to Odin technologies, to Duncan.
Hi, yeah, well, hopefully none. In that the user interface, the visual programming interface, means that essentially you don't need to learn a programming language to use it. If you're aspiring to be an automation engineer, it gives you a route of entry into learning JavaScript and Selenium JavaScript specifically, so that you can relate your test design with the JavaScript that's output by the code generator. And actually the tool is extendable by you can create JavaScript functions to add your own blocks to the set of blocks that you see on the design panel there. So it ranges from no skills in JavaScript through to using JavaScript. Our traditional automation framework Axe uses Java, .NET, various other languages associated with the different tools as well. So it depends on your needs in that case.
Yes, thanks, Duncan. And a question from Christine. What documentation and support do your tools have? I believe it also relates to you, yeah.
Yeah, so we have a very well documented in terms of Axe. The traditional automation platform has HTML-based help, PDF documentation. We have a support line as well, so an email address where we can escalate through to web meetings or on-site support. With ScriptWorks, the aim is to again, this is something that's being launched this year. So the aim is to provide series of small video tutorials like the videos that you saw today demonstrating the product, showing key components. Alongside that, we'll also have a user journey and tooltips approach to picking up the user interface, so that it will guide you through the early stages of the process.
Yeah, thank you for such a detailed answer. And we have two questions from Tobias. How do I know which functionality I can automate at your own expense? And how do I know that I can use your software on my project? I believe it relates to some specific project, yeah, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there are some general requirements or general approaches how to understand.
Yeah, so I think
it's possible to use it. Yeah,
I think possibly from Tobias's question there, relating specifically to ScriptWorks, it is aimed at web mobile development using open source platforms. So if you look at what Selenium supports and the platforms that enables you to run automation on, then ScriptWorks is creating code for Selenium. It often just helps to talk as well, so get in touch and we can let you know whether this is a suitable solution or whether we look at other platforms or frameworks as well. And likewise with Ivana and Stan's team, that they provide impartial guidance to this. And the other question was, oh, how do I know that I can use software on a project? Yeah, so that was Tobias's question again. It's trial it. trial the software. We're going into a sort of a soft launch in the coming weeks with Scriptworks, and are looking for some trial sites, and we can talk about getting that in and working with particular clients. So it comes down to evaluating whether it's appropriate, and even just having that initial discussion. Our expertise comes over 15 years of providing automation frameworks, and we know what is a good fit for a lot of clients, and as do the team from QATestLab as well.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. Yeah, the question from James to Ivana. What are the risks if you write a framework yourself? Ivana, have you ever wrote a framework yourself?
Thank you for this question. It's a good question. And as I already told you, enumerate your requirements needed for your expect project. But that should be real must-have, not just nice-to-have requirements. Probably after such an analysis, you will find out a solution you required is already available at market. If building own solution for test automation, you should have specialists who have enough skills and experience in this field. I sure to spend time and money was profit. Our project really so complex and large that it requires separate automation framework. One more case. What if the head or lead of your team that was engaged in development of framework decided to leave the company? What will you do? You should predict such a situation before starting a build own automation framework. And open source and commercial solution has a separate formal support, and it's cool. Besides framework can have community support. I mean, that's even better, as community provides you with constant and evaluation of current quality of your solution. Maybe it's my answer for your question.
Yeah, thank you. Very detailed one. Duncan, maybe you also have some ideas about the risks, something to add?
Yeah, really just to reiterate the points in the presentation, that the risks in building your own framework, I think primarily, and what I see most is maintenance. There's the initial upfront cost of building the framework and creating it, and that often is dependent on just one individual, an aspiring automation engineer or developer who builds the initial framework components and then either moves on to other things or leaves the company and decides that there is no one to maintain that. So as tests are run on another testing cycle, the tests begin to fail, or the framework needs updating, and there just isn't the skills in-house to do that, or the knowledge of that framework. And that's a scenario I've seen over and over again in organizations. Probably the number one risk, I'd say, with doing so.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. And the question from Jane to you, Duncan: what skills are needed to use your tool?
Hopefully I've answered that a little bit in the earlier question around the skills that are required. So at one end, just the learning of the visual design environment. So how to create a test using linked blocks, essentially. The learning environment is aimed at non-technical people. It's built on the foundation of other educational tools, in fact. So it's aimed at those who are looking to move towards formal algorithms and constructs, and has that very sort of shallow learning curve compared to opening up a development environment and starting to write some Java code. The skills that are required for extension and customization would be things like JavaScript, but the aim with ScriptWorks is it should be fully featured and functional out of the box, and it's only specific needs where it might require extension. So complex authentication mechanisms in a web application, those kind of scenarios. But there are people who can support a team in creating that, whether they're third party or companies. The team from QATestLab can help in supporting these kind of framework extensions. So hopefully that's answered your question.
Yes, I'm Duncan. I believe it's really detailed and useful answer. So, and I see it's all questions for now. If any one of our attendees will actually would like to clarify something, I guess you can send the questions via emails, which you could see. And I believe it's we shall finish for now. I promised Ivan and Duncan that we'll not spend more than an hour, so they can proceed with their work. I hope these webinars were useful, and the upcoming ones also will be interesting for you. Please write your questions. Please feel free to reach us in case of any need. And also, you can find us on different social networks. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the records of the webinars and to see some past and upcoming webinars news. Yeah, have a very good day and bye. Duncan, Ivanka, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.